So good evening. Welcome to this memorial meeting of Dr. Sundarlal Bahuguna. So Ms. Deeti, please introduce the program and introduce the speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Venkateshan. So first of all, good evening to all of you. Hope you're all doing well and staying safe. This is Deeti this side from Breakthrough Science Society. A very warm welcome to all of you. As you all know, June 5th is observed as the World Environment Day. Not too long, but there has been exploitation and destruction of our planet's ecosystem. Every 3 seconds, the world loses enough forest cover so as to cover a football pitch. And over the last century, half of our wetlands have been destroyed. As much as 50% of our coral reefs have already been lost, and up to 90% of coral reefs could be lost by 2050, even if global warming is limited to an increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius. Ecosystem restoration means preventing, halting, and reversing this damage. Go from exploiting nature to healing it, which happens to be the theme of this year, 2021. Only with healthy ecosystems can we enhance people's livelihoods, counteract climate change, and stop the collapse of biodiversity. Breakthrough Science Society on this occasion observed various programs, online campaigns, and competitions involving scientists, researchers, students, and all the science-loving people across India. On May 21st, 2021, we lost a noted environmentalist, Mr. Sundarlal Bahuguna. Mr. Sundarlal Bahuguna was an Indian environmentalist and led the Chipko movement. He fought for the preservation of forests in the Himalayas, first as a member of Chipko movement in the 1970s, and later spearheaded the anti-Tehri Dam movement from the 1980s to early 2004. He was one of the early environmentalists of India, and later he and others associated with Chipko movement started taking up wider environmental issues. We from Breakthrough Science Society pay our tribute to Mr. Sundarlal Bahuguna. So today, in the memory of Mr. Sundarlal Bahuguna, we bring you this talk, Saving the Environment, a Scientific Perspective. So today, we have two eminent speakers to bring out this topic with all of you. Firstly, I wish to introduce Professor Saraswati Prasad Sati. Welcome, sir. Professor Saraswati Prasad.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Good afternoon to you, all of you.
Good afternoon, sir. So just a brief introduction about Professor Sati. So he is currently the Associate Professor at VCSG Uttarakhand University of Horticulture and Forestry at Uttarakhand. Professor Sati completed his MSc PhD in Geology from HNV Gharwal University. He has wide teaching and research experience for more than 70 research papers published in various journals and national and international repute with high impact factors. His main area of research has been various aspects of Himalayas, such as past climate, glaciers, river response, natural disasters, and human intervention. He is also a fellow of Indian Geophysical Union and fellow of Earthquake Society of India. He has published more than 100 popular science articles and also is known for his popular talks on science popularization. Welcome, sir. I would now like to introduce Professor Soumitra Banerjee. Welcome, sir. Professor Banerjee is a professor of physical sciences and the Dean of Academic Affairs at IISER, Kolkata. Before moving to IISER, he taught in the Electrical Engineering Department of IIT Kharagpur for 23 years. He is known for his work on nonlinear dynamics and bifurcation theory. He received the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize in 2003. He is a fellow of National Academy of Sciences, Indian Academy of Sciences, Indian National Academy of Engineering, Indian National Science Academy, the World Academy of Sciences, and Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. He has been in the forefront of the effort to create a science movement in the country and is the All India General Secretary of the Breakthrough Science Society. A hearty welcome, Professor Banerjee. So I now we'll move on to the next section, which is the actual talk. So to conduct this, I welcome the president of today's talk. With us, we have Dr. Venkateshan, and of course, we have Professor Amitava Datta. And the proceedings will basically begin with the speakers placing their perspective, and all of you can listen to it. You can put in your comments section. For those of you who are in Zoom, yes, you can type in there. And for those of you who are on YouTube, I think you can put your comments. All of your questions will be addressed. So I now hand over the session to the president. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Deepti. I hope Professor Datta is connected.
Can you hear me?
Datta, yeah,
Yes,
Professor
yes,
Datta, we are able to hear you.
So welcome, Professor Datta. And we request from Breakthrough Science Society to you to take over this session and preside over this, please.
Thank you. So, as you all know, we have two speakers today, Professor Sati and Professor Soumitra Banerjee. The first speaker of this meeting is Professor Sati.
So you mean I should start the talk?
Yes.
Please.
This is so nice of you. First of all, I would like to thank you all for inviting me. And Professor Banerjee, I have seen his CV. He's such a great scientist. I'm so thankful to you that I am also invited, and I am also placed on that queue, though I'm not that big scientist. Anyway, let me tell three things. One is that the network here is not proper, and the second thing is that, let me tell you very frankly, I was not so close, or I'm not a specialist of Bahuguna-ji. Bahuguna's canvas of work has been some 60-70 years. So this long span of his eventful life, it needs some very serious and deep study, which I did not, I could not, but yes, I was since called, and I could not reject this invitation, because I know most of the people here, they are like-minded, and the thought process of like-minded people, it was my actually this was my interest to interact with you people, that because most of the people are of the same age. So that is one of the things which made me accept this invitation actually. As far as the Bahuguna-ji is concerned, Bahuguna, you know, there are literatures available, and is there some echo from my side or some your side also? Hello?
Yeah, it is from
Professor Datta can mute.
Please,
Temporarily.
there is some disturbance, some turbulence.
Yeah.
So I am audible, huh?
You are audible.
As you know, literatures are available that Bahuguna-ji was born on 9th January in 1927 in a small village called Maroda. It was some 7 kilometers in the upstream, in the lap of Himalaya, in the upstream of Tihri town, in the valley of Bhagirathi. It is on the bank of the Bhagirathi, the village, Maroda village. His father was a forest officer in Tihri state. Then it was an independent state, and he did his intermediate from Tihri itself. walking all the way from his village to Tiri for study and then going back. It was a some 12-kilometer daily journey for his studies and 12-kilometer. And on that, in this way, he completed his intermediate. During the process, there was a very veteran activist and freedom fighter who was later on, who was killed virtually, brutally by the state. He was Sridev Suman. Sridev Suman was very close relative to Chundarlal Bahunaji, and it was not the only thing which brought him closer, but he was very much fond of his talks. He was very much fond of his activities since very childhood actually, and he used to read those pamphlets, bills which were distributed secretly by Sumanji, Sridev Sumanji. Sridev Sumanji was very much influenced by the Gandhiji and freedom movement of India, though Tihri was not directly in the control of British. It was an independent state. Even then, he was of the same thought that sooner or later all the states of the country should have to become a one state, one country, and that was the reason he was jailed. And with him, Sundarlal Bahunaji, at the age of 17, he was also jailed in Tihri. Later on, when he got freed from the jail, he escaped from Tihri and he reached Lahore for higher studies. In his mind, it was in his mind that the fight should be with a very solid academic base and to understand the bigger ethos of the globe, bigger ethos of the country, bigger ethos of the issues. So he was very much interested for the higher studies. He went to Lahore and changed his name and his gesture also. He became Sardar Man Singh over there. And it was, and with the changed name of Sardar Man Singh, he did his graduation over there. And then after he reached Tihri, again he joined Sumanji. Sumanji then, and Sumanji was in between this process. When he was studying, Sumanji was killed brutally by the then king of that state, Tihri. And Sumanji in that duration created Swaraj Mandal party in Tihri. He joined Sundarlal Bahunaji joined that party, and then after in 1948, when Tihri became independent state, in the election held in Tihri, and Bahunaji also fought election in the banner of Prajamandal party. That Prajamandal party, which was created by Sridev Sumanji itself, he lost the election actually. Then after the state merged in the Indian Union, and Bahunaji joined the Congress as usual. He was he was in the influence of various Congress leaders, then very great leaders. He joined the Congress, and till 1956, he remained in the Congress, and he became the General Secretary of the district. Then the Tihri state was converted into the district, and he became the General Secretary of the Congress in the district. In 1956, a very turning point came in his life. There was a young girl. She was again from a family whose father was he was in the service of the state of Tihri, but her elder brother already joined the Communist Party of India. He became very veteran communist later on. Vidyasagar Nautalji, you might have heard the name, and he was also a very prolific writer as well. And his younger sister Bimla, she joined Sarlaben, and she became the social activist with Sarlaben. He joined her ashram in Kausani itself and in Tehri as well. When the offer of Sundarlal Bhognaji to marry Bimla that came there, that went there, she straightway she rejected, because you are a politician and I am not interested in politician. If you want to marry me, you have to make a promise that you will not remain in active politics. Instead, we will devote our whole life for the society as a social activist. Bhognaji accepted her condition, and then they both the activists, they got married. Then after when Bimlaji and Bhognaji got married, they established an ashram, in ashram at Siliara, which is some 40 kilometers in the valley of Bhilangana. Actually in Tehri there was a confluence of two rivers. One is Bhagirathi and another is Bhilangana. He shifted in the Bhilangana, the another valley, some 40 kilometers from Tehri town itself, and his village was 6 kilometers in the upstream of the Bhagirathi valley. And till Tehri, then there was a motor. The motorhead was at Tehri, so merely 6 kilometer was the where he had to move travel by foot. Otherwise, he was well connected with the roads. But he shifted himself with his ashram some 40 kilometers in the upstream of the Bhilangana, and she settled over there they established one Siliara ashram, what we call Navjivan Mandal ashram, Parvatiya Navjivan Mandal ashram at Siliara. From Siliara, she started. They both started several activities from Siliara ashram, and among them was Gram Swaraj movement, Bhudan of the Vinoba Bhave ji, and Dalit Chetna movement also. And Bhognaji is special in that way. He was not an activist merely, he was a reformer as well. During that process, when the whole system was so feudal and the caste system was so crystallized, and there was strict prohibition for the Dalits in the temples, Bhognaji took such a big risk, and he forcefully, with all movement, he took so many Dalits with him and entered in the temple, what we call Buddha Kedar. And people of that region, the upper caste of that region, they treat him very badly. Brutally they killed him. They beaten both husband and wife, but they never left their stand that for the social reform these things are must. So Dalit Chetana and so many other anti-liquor movement, which was also one of the major movement of that time. That was also, he led that liquor anti-liquor movement, and so many other Samajik Chetra movements were he started over there. I will tell, because the area was area was not so advanced, and women were not so, and they were not opened in the society. Bhognaji's biggest role was to involve the women with his movement, and movements of Bhudan movement of anti-liquor movement. In the form of anti-liquor movement, he he connected with the women, and in a big way, women have become later in the later phases. Women were the big strength of his all the movement activities. In 60s, anti-liquor movement was in a very peak, and Bagunaji um, twice he performed his hunger strike. One is twice in during 60s, up to 60 to 70. He was twicely he was in a big hunger strike, and he was jailed also. He was jailed also, and in 1971, ultimately because of this big movement, the government of India decided to blanket ban on the liquor in the hills of the Himalaya, because the logic behind it was that the area is so backward, and it is hill region. It has some sanctity and some spiritual sanctity as well. On the basis of these so many things, the whole area, in the whole area, the liquor was banned. Now 70s, the decade of the 70s was one of the major eventful decade in the history of Uttarakhand and history of Bagunaji as well, Bagunaji's life as well. Here the Chipko movement was in the several fragmented forest movements and increased number of forest movement. They were taking a single phase with the name of Chipko movement. Though the Chipko movement was not started by Bagunaji, but in the very soon Baguna became the synonym of the Chipko movement. Bagunaji not only led the Chipko movement, the several events of the Chipko movement in the several villages, in the several valleys, but he provided it national and international face in the form of his prolific writing. He was a prolific writer as well. Bagunaji is writing on any issue which he raised was with the full philosophy, full ground, full background. So at last, and very soon, this Chipko movement became the synonym of Bagunaji. Bagunaji became the synonym of Chipko movement. So 70s was in that way. He took 120 days. Hello. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. Please continue.
He was 120 days Padyatra. He performed 170 days across the Uttarakhand, right from the valley of Tons to valley of Kali, horizontally towards west to east. He went in a very long foot walk, and with so many activists who were involved in that way. It was a process of understanding the various issues of Uttarakhand, various issues of villagers, various issues of the people, the nature, and that these he was a very good traveler. So on these traveling events, by these traveling events, he gained such a big wisdom, and later on in 1980, the Chipko movement reached with a very big achievement that government of India decided to ban the felling for commercial felling, ban the commercial felling of the trees above 1,000 meter height above sea level. So almost in the entire hilly region of the Uttarakhand, now the forest felling, the commercial felling of the trees were banned. Then after, Bagunaji took a big march from Kashmir to Kohima of 3,000 kilometers in 1981 to 82. In 1980, it was a Forest Act, which was in which there is a provision that the whole tree felling in above 1,000 meter is banned. And then after, it was an achievement of Chipko. And then after, to understand the Himalayan issues rather than in a fragmented form, separately in Uttarakhand merely, he thought that we should talk about the Himalaya as a whole. Because Himalaya cannot be saved in a fragmented form. So he started his march from Kashmir to northeast of 3,000 kilometers, from Kashmir to Kohima. And several people, several activists, students, youths, women, they joined that march. It was a big historical march. When he completed this march, during this process, the construction of the Tiri Dam was in a speed up format, and the anti-dam movement was already there. But considering the vast experience of Bahugunaji and considering the wisdom Bahugunaji gained during this process of four or 5 decades, they offered the leadership of this anti-dam movement to Bahugunaji. Bahugunaji led that movement almost 15 years. Everybody knows that anti-Tiri Dam movement was at a very high level, and he developed, though the Tiri Dam was constructed, but he developed the awareness among the people of the area, among the people of Himalaya, among the people of the country, and among the people of the world regarding these big dam, against these big dams.
Excuse me. Excuse me, I'm very sorry to interrupt, but the Zoom meetings are of limited duration.
Oh, no, that's okay. So it is almost from my side, and that was the last, and then he in 1994, he founded the Himalaya Bachao movement, Save the Himalaya movement, and he with the consultation with all people from different people from country and world, he prepared a document, and a document was manifesto of Himalayan Bachao movement, Save Himalaya movement, and later on Bahugunaji declared it as his testimonial, his will. So this is all about Bahugunaji in brief, because I know the constraint of the Zoom meeting is of 40 minutes. So this is all about me. Later on, for last 15 years, he was quite ill. He was not well. His health was not allowed anything. He was quite aged also. But still, Bahugunaji is with all, is vibrant among the people of among so many activists, so many people who think of that Himalaya is in a very bad shape, in a very bad conditions because of the so-called developmental activities, and we should do something very quickly and at a very big level. Thank you about. I was told that I should summarize some. So I should give some brief account for on Bahugunaji. That was all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sati. We are very happy that on this World Environment Day, we could recall the great achievements of Bahugunaji, and we thank Professor Sati again for his summary. I now invite Professor Soumitra Banerjee to present his talk. His talk is particularly important because last year, you know that the draft environment impact assessment was circulated during the pandemic, and there are many debatable points in the draft. So I'm sure that this is the right time to hear from Soumitra Banerjee the possible outcome of this draft act. Professor Soumitra Banerjee.
Thank you, Professor Doctor. I also thank Professor Sati for exposing us about the life and struggle of Sundarlal Bahuguna. There are people who showed us the way of an environmental movement, and Sundarlal Bahuguna was one of them. I have been requested to speak about a scientific way to look at the environmental crisis and the way to solve it. That the environment is in a crisis is beyond debate. We all more or less know, especially during the lockdown period when we were not going out, the industries were closed, the public transport was closed, the roads were empty. During that time, the air that we inhaled was far more cleaner, and so we got an idea about how polluted the air normally is. So the air that we normally inhale is polluted with various toxic substances. The water that we drink is also polluted with various toxic substances. And so the environment in which we live are polluted in various possible ways. And that is something that we know possibly. The problem that we are facing, it did not rise to this level overnight. But the awareness that it is going in this direction, and unless we do something, it might really get worse. That awareness came more or less in the 1970s. Before that, problems were there, but the dimension was not this much. In 1970s, it was noticed that the rain that was coming sometimes was acidic, and it was realized that the things that we burn, the fuel that we burn, contains, obviously, the coal that we burn contains sulfur, and as we oxidize it, it becomes various oxides of sulfur. And also in the internal combustion engines and in power plants, nitrogen in the air reacts with oxygen in the air to produce various oxides of nitrogen, and these things get mixed up with the air, and when the rain comes down, it comes down with these things. As a result, the rain is acidic. This realization came approximately in the 1970s. In the 1980s, there was another revelation. You see, our planet is saved from the harmful effects of the ultraviolet radiation by a layer of ozone in the upper atmosphere. It was noticed that the ozone layer is thinning, and in some places, holes are developing, as a result of which ultraviolet rays are coming in, and if that is not checked, we knew that that would increase the occurrence of cancer. Why was that happening? Investigations revealed that a substance called CFC, chlorofluorocarbon, is responsible for that. And where is CFC found? Basically, that is an industrial substance used in refrigerators and air conditioners. So there was then an attempt to find alternatives of CFC, but I'll come to that, what happened to that. And then after that, there was a revelation that the overall temperature of the globe is increasing. it was obtained, the results were obtained from actual measurements. So it is not really somebody's guess. It is the result of measurement. We found that there is an increase in the temperature. Now, why is this increase? There can be various theories for it. For example, it has been seen that there are certain substances called greenhouse substances. In the cold countries, people sometimes cover an area with glass and grow temperate vegetables in that greenhouse. And what actually happens is that the visible part of radiation goes through the glass into the things inside, hits them up, and naturally those things will re-emit the heat radiation, infrared radiation, but that infrared radiation cannot go through glass. So it is trapped, heat is trapped. This phenomenon is called the greenhouse effect, and it was known that in the atmosphere there are certain gases which have the same property. Most important of them is carbon dioxide, ubiquitous everywhere, but it is there in the atmosphere in relatively small quantities. So as a whole, the atmosphere does not act as a proper greenhouse, but the atmosphere of Venus does, because there carbon dioxide is the main constituent. As a result of which, even though Venus is not very far from the Earth, the surface temperature of Venus is such that it would melt even lead. So there was a fear that if the density of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere goes up, then we might land into a situation of a runaway greenhouse effect. There are some other greenhouse gases like methane and all, but carbon dioxide is considered to be mainly responsible. Though I must admit that there has been some debate on the issue whether the temperature rise is anthropogenic, which means that caused by man, human activities, or is it natural? Because in geological history, it is known that the Earth's temperature has gone up and down. So there are certain times when the temperature goes down and another time when temperature goes up due to natural processes. So it is possible for temperature to go up due to natural processes, and it is also possible for the temperature to go up due to man-made processes. But right now the situation is that most scientists are of the opinion that the present accelerated rate of temperature rise, the melting of the Arctic ice, the melting of the permafrost, all these are basically caused by human activities, because we have been burning fossil fuels at a very high rate. The reason is that from experimental work, we know that if there is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it has the greenhouse property, and so increase in carbon dioxide will cause greenhouse effect. And it is also measured and found that the density of carbon dioxide has increased in the atmosphere. There is another contributing factor. There is in any case a lot of carbon dioxide in the upper strata of the Earth, but much of it is actually dissolved in seawater. But the amount of carbon dioxide that can be dissolved in seawater depends on the temperature of the seawater. So if the average temperature increases, it will be able to dissolve less of carbon dioxide, and naturally there will be more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which will cause greenhouse effect, which will again increase the temperature. The temperature increase will allow even less amount of carbon dioxide to be dissolved in the seawater. So it is a multiplier effect. And that is what the scientific community is afraid of now. That is why there is such a call to arrest the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We have also seen that there are other polluting agents, most important of that being plastic. Sometimes people say that there was a time when it was a bronze age, then came the iron age, and then came the plastic age. Today, our life is permeated by the use of plastic. But the plastic is actually causing a lot of harm because it is not biodegradable. And as a result, it remains in the atmosphere, chokes the passage of water, the drainage systems, and also ultimately lands in the water of the river, the sea, oceans, and causes innumerable harm. But if you notice very carefully where plastic is used, you will find that 80% of the plastic is used in packaging. Packaging means whenever we buy something, we are now used to buying things in packaged form. Now, this is not really necessary. We could have bought those things without the packaging. In fact, when I was a child, we never used to buy things in packaged form. But now this has become the norm. As a result, all these packaging becomes waste and contributes to polluting the atmosphere. And also, the developmental work or the activities that go in the name of development that has contributed to the accelerated pace at which the environment is degraded. In the beginning, Dipti gave a figure of how many species we are losing every day. So these species, many of them we do not know. We do not even know. And many people have the idea that maybe the lions, the tigers, the deer, these things are good for seeing in the zoo. Maybe there can be a few places where they can be kept, but these are not really necessary for mankind. That's not quite so, because the whole biological environment, the flora and fauna, the huge number of species, they have evolved to this form through millions of years of evolution, and they contain rich genetic information. And if we lose those species, maybe small insects, maybe things that we barely notice, if we lose them, maybe we'll lose some important resource of the future. Just imagine the drug penicillin was discovered from a specific type of fungus. Imagine that before the discovery of that drug penicillin, that particular fungus became extinct without us even knowing that. Would we get the advantage of penicillin? No. And right now, most of the biological world is truly unexplored. We don't really know. Especially, we know maybe the big mammals or big reptiles, but the small ones, the insects, all the plants and fungi, we really do not know all of them. Still, people are trying to learn, and we may have a huge resource waiting for us to discover. And if that goes extinct, we'll forever be deprived of that advantage. So maintaining, protecting the environment is in our own sake. It is not just for looking at the tiger or the lion in the zoo for our own entertainment. It is for our life that is needed. But what I was saying, the destruction is often caused by mindless activities that goes in the name of development. A typical case can be cited in the Himalayas. in the Himalayas, this Himalaya range of mountains, as you know, in geological time scale, it is not very old. Geological time scale, it is not very old. It is still forming. And as a result, the slopes are not always very stable. So in Himalayas, you find landslides very often. And this is arrested by the occurrence of trees and their roots. These are responsible for arresting the landslides and destruction of the environment. If one cuts the trees, that is disrupted, and so there will be landslides. The soil that binds the rock, that will wash off, accelerating the pace of landslides, and that is what has happened in much of the Himalaya region. And that's exactly what Sundarlal Bahuguna led a movement against. But also we will find that in the mountainous regions, there is now a tendency of constructing big dams. That has happened in the Tehri region, that has happened in Sikkim, that is now happening in Arunachal Pradesh, for the sake of producing electricity. True, we need electricity, but whether we need big dams for that purpose, that is a questionable matter. So I will come to this issue a little later. Also, because of these development activities, there has been a large-scale cutting of trees, as a result of which, see, the raindrops normally fall on the leaves of the trees and then fall down, as a result of which the velocity with which the raindrop strikes the ground is not very high. But if the trees are cut, then the raindrops can strike the ground at high speed, and as a result of which the soil is dislocated, and that results in soil erosion. Soil erodes. That soil ultimately is led to the rivers. So the rivers become more and more silt laden, and all that silt ultimately chokes the rivers, as a result of which most of the rivers in India are now, their depth is reducing. In many cases, the rivers are no longer rivers. People can even walk across them most of the time of the year. And that silt ultimately is deposited in the places where you do not want so this is becoming a major problem. The fact that most of the mountains, we have now denuding of the mountains and construction of the big dams, and for that, construction of roads, big dams, lines, all that has resulted in a situation where we have a larger occurrence, frequent occurrence of flash floods, many of which we have seen over the last few years. So we are now facing a true crisis of the environment. So now we need to understand what is really causing this. You might say that wrong way of people's living. Yes, much of us are led by advertisements, and advertisements lure us to buy things which we do not need, might not need. And that way, it is a wasteful society. Yes, that is definitely a reason. But there are different and more deeper reasons for this destruction of the environment. And that is to do with the way everything is produced in our country and most countries in the world. If we really have to understand why, in spite of our understanding that the global warming is happening, in spite of our understanding that there is thinning of the ozone layer, in spite of our understanding that nobody will be spared, I mean, the problem is so global, still practically nothing has been done. Why is so? Why practically nothing is being done about it? if you have to understand that, we need to understand how the production happens in a society like ours. You see, in order to do any production, somebody invests and buys three things. One is land, second is labor, and third is raw material. And after having bought these, after having established the factory, engaging the labor, buying the raw material, some products are produced. And finally, these products are sold in the market. And it is sold in the market at a price that is higher than the price, higher than the spending in these three things. And as a result of which, the person who invested gets a profit. Now, the whole production system works on the principle of maximization of profit. So let us try to understand how the profit can be maximized. Since I said that there are three things majorly in which the industrialist invests. One is land. So in order to maximize the profit, one would try to get the land at the least price possible. Second is labor. One would try to maximize the profit by paying the least to the labor. And third, in order to maximize the profit, one would have to spend the least on the raw materials. Now, the first two come within the ambit of economics and political theory. I'll not go into that. Let us concentrate. We can see that immediately results in a situation where the people who are mainly employed in these industries will not be paid the amount that they produce, as a result of which they will be slowly pauperized, their purchasing power will be reduced, and it will lead to crisis in the market, which we are witnessing. That's the economic part. But the environmental part of it is that the industrialist also earns maximum profit by paying the least for the raw materials. Now, what are the raw materials? The raw materials are the sources of energy and other things. For example, in order to make the shirt, one had to produce the cotton in the field, and in order to produce the cotton in the field, the person who actually produces the cotton had to buy certain things, but ultimately the profit of the industrialist will be maximized if that man is paid the least. In order to make it into the shirt, an industry had to be installed, and industry needs energy, so energy had to be produced, and the energy, coal for example, electricity for example, that had to be then produced at the least possible expenditure. And every industry produces some waste products. Now, if you might say logically that the waste has to be processed before it is laid into the environment, but the processing costs money and therefore reduces the profit. And therefore, what we actually observe is that the waste of the industries are directly, without any purification, left into the atmosphere. That is why you see black soot coming out of the chimneys. That is why you see black sludge coming out of the industries, going into the nalas and ultimately into the rivers, polluting the rivers. All that is happening because of this factor, that in order to process that, one has to spend money, and spending money reduces the profit. It makes more sense to arrange such that these things are sort of condoned by the administration. So what I'm trying to point out is that it is this production system which is at the root cause of the destruction. It sees the earth, the resources of the earth, whatever are there under the mines, whatever are there in the seas, whatever are there in the environment, all that as raw material, resource, waiting to be exploited. So, waiting to be exploited, they are to be exploited. This approach, and exploited at the least possible cost. This approach, this is what is actually killing our environment. Just imagine the person who cuts the trees in the forests, they are often the landless people of that particular area. In order to get something to eat, they have to do that. But somebody has paid that person to cut the tree, right? And if you follow the chain, you will find that at the end, it is being used by somebody for the industrial purpose. So, where the destruction is being done to where it's actually being used, that may be quite far off. Nowadays, at earlier part of this century, the last century, most industries were belonging to a country, national industries. But now, most of the industries have assumed a multinational character, MNCs, multinational corporations. So capital flows wherever it can make more money. And it can make more money where it can exploit the environment without any hindrance. That is why there is such a large-scale exploitation of the environment and destruction of the environment. That is exactly why you will find that even though we understood that the thickness of the ozone layer is reducing, we fail to change the substance that is used in our air conditioners and refrigerators. Why? Because in order to change, it costs money into research. It costs money into changing the industrial setup, and nobody is willing to do that. That's exactly why, even though there's a lot of talk about reducing the carbon footprint, actually nothing worthwhile is happening. It is because unless production happens for the sake of the people, we need a certain thing, that's why we produce that. If the production's objective is that, then only there can be a objective of protecting the experiment protecting the environment to the maximum way possible. Otherwise, the way people are subject to exploitation, in the similar way, environment is also subject to exploitation. And that's exactly why, even though we came to know about these things from the 1970s, in the last 50 years, practically nothing has happened. But I would also say that on this, there has been various points of view, various approaches to the problem of the environment. In the West, in the European countries in the main, Germany, for example, there have been parties that are called the green parties, political parties. And they have also come to power in certain states of Germany and other European countries. So they have led. They have been in the ruling position in many places. But has the situation changed in those places? Not really. Why? Because these parties talk about the environment all right. These parties cry regarding the destruction of the environment all right. But they never point their finger at the root cause of the destruction of the environment. Unless the objective of production changes, this situation cannot change. They do not talk about that. And similar is the situation with environmentalists, like, for example, Albert Gore, who was the vice president of the United States at some point of time. And after that, he has been spending his time being a vocal environmentalist. He goes place to place giving motivational lectures on environmental protection. But does he ever talk about this root cause of destruction of the environment? So you will find that there are environmentalists who never talk about the root cause. They only talk about the things that are happening, the destruction that is happening, and say that this has to be arrested. But why these are happening and why nothing is really being done, they never talk about. There is another type of environmentalists who argue that we should really, the modern society is responsible for all that. So we should go back to the ancient society. Our style of living should become like the ancient men. Living in the forests, living in the with the small amount of things that the forest can offer, frugal life. We should all live like that. And only by doing that, we'll be able to protect the environment. There are people like that. There are also people who can be called ultra environmentalists who object to any developmental activity. Whenever a road is built, whenever a railway track is laid, whenever a school building is built, then also there is some destruction of the environment. When the school building is built, there would be some worms who live in the soil below that school building who would not live after that. So they even cry about that. So our question is that then we have to find out, since the discussion today is regarding a scientific way of looking at the environment problem, we have to face the question, is this approach scientific? Can we really go back to the ancient society? Or should the society as a whole advance from an ancient society with ancient thinking, ancient science, ancient technology to a society which is equipped with modern knowledge, equipped with modern technology, but with the knowledge as to what harm can be done to the environment by its individual activities, and so a society that can optimize and minimize the harm to the people while maximizing the standard of living, quality of living. What would be our approach? I personally believe, and I am placing this point for your consideration, that the approach, correct approach should be that we should really exploit the science, the knowledge about the function of nature, and we should continually try to improve the quality of life. Quality of life, not in the sense of a few people's quality of life in the sense of everybody's quality of life. And if you want to increase the quality of life of everybody, you have to feed everybody, you have to clothe everybody, you have to provide education to everybody, you have to provide cultural entertainment to everybody. All these are part of in modern life. And so for that, whatever is needed has to be done, but has to be done with the objective of meeting the necessities of the people, not from a market-oriented objective. Whatever brings me profit, I will do that. If we can change that approach, then that is the scientific approach according to me. I'll also point out that there is a point of view, a school of thought initiated by who are known as feminists, the people who are known to be feminists. That means they talk in terms of the exploitation of women by men or by the society, and they want to change that. That's a laudable thing to do. In fact, that's really necessary, because women have been exploited, women have been put down, women have been not allowed to go to proper positions for a long time, and that has to be changed. Okay, there's no doubt about it. But there's a section of feminists who equate the exploitation of the environment with the exploitation of women, put them in the same basket. The line of thinking is called ecofeminism, who say that the way male exploits the females, the way males can rape a female, in the same way, science is raping the environment. And that way they assign a male character to science. Science and technology is male in character. And their whole approach then becomes to go away, shun modern science, because it is male in character according to them. And then what do you embrace if you shun modern science? Naturally, you embrace the ancient knowledge. So there have been various people in the West who advocated this point of view. In our country, there are also people who believe in this position. For example, I have been an admirer of Mrs. Vandana Shiva. She is a real great orator, great advocate of the cause of environment. And in many cases, she has really made a mark. So I'm an admirer of her. But there are certain points in which I could not agree with her point of view. I can read from her writing. She says, modern science and development are projects of male Western origin, both historically and ideologically. They are the latest and most brutal expression of a patriarchal ideology, which is threatening to annihilate nature and the entire human species. The rise of a patriarchal culture, patriarchal science of nature, took place in Europe during the 15th and 17th centuries as the scientific revolution. So he accuses the scientific revolution for the destruction of the environment. And she thinks it is a patriarchal science that developed through the Renaissance and Enlightenment. And naturally, her approach is to go back. So she says, these principles, she says, the connections between ecology, agriculture, food, and health, which guided our traditional scientific knowledge, were ignored by mechanistic science. These principles of interconnectedness are given in our ancient Upanishads and Vedas and reflect the latest scientific understanding of the web of life as a food web. The ecological paradigm of our ancient sciences are taking place as the new science of ecology and biology, which promote non-violence, harmony, and balance. So you see, the general approach of ecofeminists then is to shun modern science and look at ancient knowledge as the thing to look forward to. This is where, even though I admire them, this is where my point of view differs with them. I'm submitting this to this august audience for consideration. Now, if we take a scientific approach the way I just said, we have to do development. We have to build industries. We have to clothe people, and naturally there has to be clothes produced. And naturally there has to be agriculture, there have to be industries, and we have to produce energy. And in order to produce energy, we have to burn coal then. We have to produce hydroelectricity. But if the approach is that we have to do that by disturbing the environment to the least extent possible, then there are ways. For example, if coal burning produces carbon dioxide, planting more and more trees counters that effect. If you have to produce electricity from hydroelectricity, the river water, then if these are done by not by storing water, but by what is known as a run of the river hydroelectric plants, then the electricity can be produced without causing much harm to the environment. So there are ways, but we do not look at those ways. We look at the easy way of doing what we need to do in order to sustain our industries, present day industries, by spending the least to protect them. That is the problem. Now, the awareness, as I said, came around the early 1970s, and the first pointer came in the form of the publication of a book. The name of the book was Limits to Growth. It was by a few scientists who came together from different parts of the globe, came together, formed a body called the Club of Rome. Probably the first meeting was in Rome, that's why it is called the Club of Rome. But in that book, they argued that the way we are growing, the way we are developing, these developments, this cannot go on infinitely. There's a limit to it. Why? Because in order to do these developments, we need energy, and the energy resources are finite. Coal is finite, oil is finite, so ultimately at some point of time, they will exhaust. And if you say that, okay, we'll completely go to renewable resources, then also they say that even the things that we use, for example, we use alloys. For that, we might need, for example, manganese. The resource manganese is also finite. You cannot have infinite amount of manganese. So if you mine the manganese, produce the alloys, use the things, ultimately they will become junk, and naturally they can no longer be recovered. So their point was that ultimately things are finite, and therefore we have to be now cautious in spending anything. Please be cautious. That year itself, there was a art summit convened in Stockholm. And in that Stockholm summit, the leaders of all the nations, all the important nations of the globe conferred, and they decided on certain minimum measures to take. And certain countries became signatories, certain countries did not become signatories. USA was not a signatory, but certain countries became a signatory. Even the countries who became a signatory, it was found that practically nothing was done. 20 years down the line, 20 years later, in 1992, another art summit was convened in Rio. And in that, when it was reviewed how much has been the success of the earlier accord, it was found that that's practically nil. In that summit meeting, the leader of Cuba, Fidel Castro, gave a speech titled, "Tomorrow is Too Late." And in that, that speech, Castro actually pointed out the way the environmental destruction is happening because of the greed, to meet the greed of a few people, that cannot be sustained by this planet. The planet is large, but the planet is not infinite. So unless we take the corrective measures now, it may run into a runaway global warming, and then it cannot be arrested. It will have a catastrophic consequences. That was 1992. So he appealed to all the countries to get away from this production for the purpose of greed, maximum profit, to come away from it and to produce for the sake of the people's necessities. Unfortunately, that was not heeded. And now we still, after so many years of that Rio summit, we still have a situation when practically nothing has been done in real terms to protect the environment. We have been talking and talking and talking. There have been seminars, webinars at different levels, at the national levels, at the international levels. Practically nothing has transpired by way of action. So I will just end by saying that in this situation, our country, India, has enacted the EIA last year, in which earlier there were some protections of the environment. So certain clearances had to be taken in order to do certain activities. I mean, clearing of certain forests for the purpose of mining and things like that. So clearance had to be taken, and the environmental impact would be assessed, and then only clearance would be given. This kind of checks and balances were there. These have been removed, which means that now it is a free play for those who want to make extra additional profit by exploiting the environment. I would request the audience to be vocal against this. I would only end by saying that the environment can truly be protected only if we get away from the greed-based production system to a welfare-based production system. So I would request all the audience to think about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Banerjee. Can you hear me? This is something I have to.
Yes.
Yes.
So thank you, Professor Banerjee, for a very nice talk, putting in a nutshell what has happened. Because of the earth is finite, but the greed turns out to be infinite. And obviously two are not compatible. Now, living in India, for us, the most important thing is to make our country, the environmental policy of our country, somehow sensible. But as Professor Banerjee told at the end, whatever little checks of balance we had are getting diluted. On the other hand, we are all talking about clean environment. Our ministers are talking about clean environments. But at the same time, they are, whatever little checks and balances we had, they are trying to dilute them. And the motivation is clear also from Professor Banerjee's talk. Greed without end, profit without end, profit at the expense of the whole world. So we have to fight against it. Whatever little resources we have to mobilize it, and we have to fight against it. But now it's a question of, you see, not only political will, but also public pressure, because the political will is not very obvious. So there is going to be a very uncertain period for the next few years, that if this draft NIA is accepted, then of course the situation will become extremely difficult. It will worsen our problems. So with that, I think we should go to the participants now, and if there is any question. No, I don't find anything in the...
Dr. Venkatesan?
Yes.
Is there any question in the chat box?
So far in the chat, only few comments have come. YouTube, I think Manav or Deepti, they have to see. Meanwhile, I have a doubt to be cleared with the first speaker, Professor Saraswati. Professor Saraswati,
Thank you.
Yeah. No, this Tehri Dam issue, which was there 2 decades ago, Dr. Sundarlal Bahuguna led a big movement. How you got culminated? Can you just say something? Because the dam construction, whether it was acceptable, and what was the thing? I just want an information related to that.
The dam is completed, as you know, in 2006. This reservoir was filled, but as far as the feasibility of dam is concerned, during the process of this anti-dam movement, what I came to realize that when the things are in execution form, it is very difficult. The anti-establishment attitude, or the anti-dam or the anti-project movement becomes extremely difficult. We have seen it in Tehri Dam. We have seen it in Srinagar Dam itself, where the activists of anti-dam, their face was blackened by these contractor lobbies, and they are local people actually. The same had happened in Tehri itself. Bahuguna ji was treated several times very badly. So, but one thing is that now nobody is in position to finalize big dams like Tehri Dam in Indian side particularly. Though it is a very unfortunate fact that in China there are a series of big dams in different stage of pipeline. In India as well, we have published a paper against this Pancheshwar Dam, which is proposed on the Kali River, which is at the border of Nepal and India, and it is much higher than that of as far as the proposal is concerned, it is some 311 meter high, though Tehri Dam was 260 meter high. And what they project that it will generate 5,000 megawatt, as Tehri Dam was projected for 2,400 megawatt. But since 2006, when the dam started to generate the power, it is merely the 450 megawatts. As an average, between 400 and 450 megawatt electricity is being generated by the Tehri Dam itself, and for that, at 42 square kilometer reservoir or lake is formed, and some population of in the hills, some population of more than 1 lakh people were uprooted from there. A very old city, a very old town of Tehri that is submerged there. So many people are uprooted, out migrated. And we have published a paper in 2020, and there is a drawdown effect. Post-reservoir effect are very severe on the hills remained there.
Okay, one more question from the audience to you. Dr. Raja Ghosh, he has put a question. What's your opinion about Vaishnav movement? Would you kindly say something about that? I think it is also informative. Can limit, yes. Vaishnav or Kejri movement. Kejri or Vaishnav.
Vaishnav
movement by Bahuguna. I understand. Maybe Raja Ghosh is there in the Zoom. He can place his question directly after I read out.
Vishnoi movement.
Vishnoi.
Vishnoi movement.
Yeah.
Vishnoi movement. Sorry, I'm not aware about that. I have already told you that I don't know much about.
Okay. So again, third question is there to you again. How is the Uttarakhand currently reaching the issue of climate change? I think it's a very big question, or the answer may be a separate session itself.
Actually, if there is a phenomenon of climate change, so two regions in the Earth globe, they are going to be severely affected. One is the shoreline, this areas along the bank of the beaches, or along the shoreline of the oceans, and another is higher Himalayan regions or higher reaches of the mountains where there are glaciers. So we have almost 5,000 glaciers, and all the glaciers are sitting back. Yeah. The problem is not that only. Because of this global warming, flash floods are increased in the number of flash floods. There are reports and the studies that flash floods are being increased. The events of the flash floods are being increased in Uttarakhand
Recent
every
times, yeah.
year
Okay.
or recent times.
Mhm.
And we have seen 2013 the climate change or global warming. Due to this, we have observed that the incidences of exceptionally high precipitation, exceptionally high rain events are occurring in those places which are otherwise they were rain shade places, and those places which were historically they were otherwise use rain receiver regions, they are facing severe stress rain
Okay.
severe scarcity of the rains. So there are so many now
Climate
recently
issues.
you have heard that Rishi Ganga project, Rishi Ganga event, and before that, the Sumna event. After that, the Sumna event, two big events in the odd season. In the season of February and March and April, these events are occurring. So these are also very unusual. 2013 event was also very unusual. So
Yeah.
these are the things which are being witnessed in the Uttarakhand, and some species they are dominating very rapidly. For example, pigs. Wild pigs is now become a big problem here, which was not previously, which was not reported here. And again, the same time, the forest fire have become so prominent, and a very particular species of the trees, that is cheed pine, Pinus roxburghi. That is a fire promoting, fire resistant species. It has dominated now all the forests of the Uttarakhand hills. So these
Yeah.
are some things
Issues
which are
there.
seen
Yes.
everywhere.
Yeah, actually, Uttarakhand is a climate sensitive, eco sensitive area. Separate sessions we may have to hold later. A few more questions are there. Probably it is towards Dr. Sumitra Banerjee. I'll just read a couple of questions, then you can combine and answer. There, some are informative. For example, Dr. Samir Ranjan, he has asked a question: is safe and clean chemical industry possible? If possible, what measures will have to be taken? Then another question is, can you mention some diseases which can occur due to environmental pollution? What are carcinogenic substances? Okay, they are some informative. What are carcinogenic substances present in air? Then Dr. Samir Ranjan, again, he is asking, will you please tell something about smoke management? And fourth question from Manish Kumar is, sir, is there any scientific effect on environment due to using hybrid plantation? So I think there are some pollution related and then plantation related, industry related questions.
Yeah, I may not know the answer of all these questions to the details the questioners may have expected. Firstly, chemical industries, each industry is different. Each industry's process is different, product is different, and naturally there is no general answer to this question. But I am talking about a approach. If the approach is that we will cause the least harm to the environment, which means that whatever goes out of the industry into the environment, either in effluent form or in air form, that has to be cleaned as much as possible. If that approach is there, then it can be environmentally acceptable. I mean, one has to install additional things which might make profit less, but environmental benign. But that depends on the kind of industry. There are toxic industries, and for that, the expense in cleaning up will be more. There are less toxic industries where the expense for cleaning up will be less. Regarding hybrid
plantation
plants, yes. Well, these are plants that yield more, and in order to yield more, you have to put more artificial manures and pesticides. So that is a problem. Ultimately, that becomes a problem for the environment. But now certain measures are being developed by which you can avoid applying artificial pesticides and still keep the pests under control. So those avenues need to be looked at more. I would not particularly argue against the use of hybrid seeds because ultimately we need to increase production. But while we increase the production, we have to see how we can conserve the soil, conserve the environment, conserve the water, conserve the air maximum. Let that be handled. The suggestion comes from the scientists.
Yeah.
I'm not a specialist in that area. What exactly can be done?
Yeah, thank you. Some questions from YouTube also, I think I have read out. YouTube watchers can raise their questions in the YouTube chat. We will pick it up. And then not very many questions are there. A few comments are there. And maybe one comment
not
is,
many questions,
then we'll switch over to, I think, the president of this session, Professor Datta, please.
Dr. Venkatesan.
Yes.
I think the last question by Mr. Manish Kumar is related to genetically modified crops or hybrid crops.
Yes.
But how it is affecting
there are two different things. Hybrid crops and GM crops are different things.
Yeah, but he has asked only.
Was the question related to GM crops?
No, it was written hybrid.
Hybrid plantation.
Yeah, yes. Hybrid is different.
Yeah.
But genetically modified organisms, there is an issue there. See, with genetics, we can modify the genetic code of various organisms, including the crop varieties, and the cotton varieties that are now produced in India. They are now hybrid, not hybrid, the GM type. It's called BT cotton. The brinjals, these are also BT brinjals have been introduced. And also there is a talk about introducing rice varieties. The problem is that in here the objective was to make these species, either the brinjal or the cotton, immune from the attack of a certain type of pest. And in order to do that, it has been done. So that was the apparent objective. There are two issues here. One issue is that what are the other effects that has not been investigated in details. For example, if these GM varieties cross with other naturally evolving plants, what will happen? Which cannot be avoided because the pollination happens by bees and you cannot control the bees. So what will happen then? These are not really well understood. So it has been only checked with that this particular variety does this achieve this objective. Second issue is that in no time the pests develop immunity to that particular chemical that is produced by this genetically modified, and after some years the situation remains the same. But in the meantime, what happens is that since these seeds are marketed by certain companies, in this case Monsanto, and if the farmer grows the seed and keeps some part of the seed for himself for planting next year, these seeds become contaminated, and therefore the farmer becomes obliged to buy seeds from one company. Now, this whole thing, even though its apparent objective was to free from that particular pest, the actual economic result has been the establishment of the monopoly of a few transnational corporations in the seed market. So effectively that has happened. And that's why I would point out that even though genetically modified organisms might enable us to avoid certain problems, but we need to see it in a bigger perspective.
Right.
If the genetical modification and things like that are in the hands of a handful of companies, then that can be used for wrong purposes.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. I think one or two questions are there that we can take up at the end. Now, Professor Datta, the president of this session, will take over and he will deliver his presidential address. Professor Datta, please.
Thank you. See, the point is, as probably many of you know, that there was an effort by the scientific community, which is called, it started with Global March for Science, and as a part of the Global March, we were organizing also India March for Science in various cities. And one of the main point was this environmental issue. In fact, the first Global March for Science was triggered by the then US President Trump's very explicit anti-environmental policies. So there was at least one platform globally and in many cities of India. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, last year we could not organize that meeting. This year also, I don't know, it looks very unlikely that we will be able to do it. As a substitute, I would say that all chapters of Breakthrough Science Society should organize some kind of protest of the environment impact assessment draft policy, because as Professor Banerjee said, and you can also go to the net and find it out, this is a real disaster. Because you see, previously, even if you have to make a small apartment complex, you have to get so many clearances. Now, probably that was annoying a little bit for the developer, but for the bigger purpose, it was extremely necessary. Now they have made a rule that up to so many apartments, this environment impact assessment is not important. Now, this is extremely dangerous because, as Professor Banerjee told, and we all know that grid is infinite. So, the developer may deviate from the plan, developer may do something which is harmful to the environment. Probably the drainage system is not good. I don't know. But now there is a post facto management policy. That is, if something is found to be detrimental to the environment, the person concerned, be him an industrialist or a developer or whatever, he can get away with paying fines. And as you all know, the fine is manipulable. What will be the fine? It depends on give and take policy. So in various things, you have talked about deforestation, Bahugunaji's main contribution, and now the government can give permission to build mines in areas which were previously forbidden because they were identified as tribal lands, people belonging to the tribes, and now the government can interfere in that also. Now, so this situation is extremely dangerous. So we cannot have a big platform like India March for Science, but if Breakthrough Society at least goes to the social media and explicitly starts talking about the various effective rules in the environment, it is still in the draft stage. So that is at least what we can do in the middle of this pandemic. So I thank again everybody for attending this webinar. And I thank both the speakers. And now I give it over to the organizers to conclude the webinar.
Thank you, Professor, for presiding this function and giving an appeal at the end, which is very much necessary, in fact. The real tribute to Dr. Sundarlal Bahuguna, a 94-year-old youth who led the entire country and safeguarded the green cover, it will be really fulfilled only when we continue the movement and as a movement to safeguard the environment. We will involve the fraternal agencies, organizations. Yes.
मैंने कहा यहाँ मैंने तो यहाँ दिलाई थी ना कहीं घर पे तो नहीं.
Okay, so that is very much essential. We always been roping in, and in our India March for Science, a march of the scientists and science-loving people in our country, where we highlight, among other things, the environmental issue as one of the prominent issues of the world and India particular. And as you rightly pointed out, the Environmental Impact Act 2020, which is yet to be adopted by the central government, we have already submitted our concerns to the central government. Still, there is time to involve large number of people in drafting their suggestions and their opinions, and once again reiterating our concerns to the central government to change this environmental impact assessment. And those who are participating, those who have participated in this meeting and observed and watched this program in YouTube, our appeal from Breakthrough Science Society is, please visit breakthroughindia.org, where you can see an application for membership if you desire to become a member, or else to view different types of our programs so that we can join together, strengthen our hands to develop this science movement, and that comprises of this environment movement too. So with this appeal, I thank all the participants. I thank the speakers, the president and the two speakers, plus the organizers of this Breakthrough Science Society who have organized this meeting. Thank you, one and all.